Okay, okay, I think we can start. Or you want 1 minute? Sure. Okay, so welcome everyone. Let me introduce Vasil Kaigorodov, who will be giving a talk about test-driven development for servers infrastructure. So, floor is yours.
Hello, guys. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk. Before we actually start, I will speak about myself. And while I'm doing it, if you have your laptop connected to the Wi-Fi, you can clone the repository. You see the URL on the screen to be able to follow the talk on your own laptop. It's optional, it's not mandatory. I will try at least to show you some code on my own laptop, but you might find it useful to be able to follow yourself. So I started with the Unix world in 2003. It was a FreeBSD CD. My friend handed me over it, saying that it's really something different and different from what I got used to. It really was, because before that I was using only Windows. Killed my PC a couple of times while trying to install FreeBSD, formatted everything. Started to work in IT area in 2005. And in 2012, I joined Red Hat as a junior technical support engineer. And from late 2015, I'm working again at Red Hat as a senior sysadmin, responsible for central CI infrastructures. I have never worked as a quality assurance engineer and know close to nothing about testing software. Hopefully, it will not be a problem, because we will be speaking about testing infrastructures anyway. We are going to speak about test-driven development in general, like what it is and what TDD stands for. And then I will show you the Serverspec tool, which I personally use in my day-to-day work to make sure that my servers are set up correctly. I will quickly go through getting started steps, and I will speak about different components of Serverspec, and then we'll demonstrate you the end result of what Serverspec can do. So what's TDD? This abbreviation stands for test-driven development, and Wikipedia gives us a very nice definition of test-driven development. It's basically a process when you get a requirement first, translate them to the test case, create tests based on these test cases, and then, only then, after that, after you have your tests ready, you do the implementation, the actual development work. So, tests first, then the actual code. For example, we can have a requirement that the user password length should be 8 characters or more, but not more than 512 characters. And among other things, a test case might look like check that the password variable is set and check that the password variable length is more or equal to 9 or less than or equal to 512. And then we implement some code to ensure this and to work on it. For infrastructures, though, the definition will be slightly different. Again, it will be a process where you gather requirements, but instead of doing some software changes, you change your infrastructure to be compliant to the test cases. And I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, we might have a requirement for a server to have a user nobody with a SBIN no login set as a login shell for this user. And a test case will look like we check that user nobody exists, and we check that this user has been no login set as a login shell. Implementation is easy. It's only one shell command, change shell for user nobody. Testing software is easy, in my opinion, and I'm not saying that it's easy to do it. What I'm trying to say is that there are all kind of tooling around software testing. You can have Perl unit, JUnit, whatever unit. We have ptest for Python testing. We have RSpec for Ruby code testing. We have all kind of integrated test suites. Very cool stuff. For infrastructures, until like recently, I was either running those grep commands to see if a user actually exists and what login shell he has, or you might want to try to switch to this user and see if you're successful or you're getting an error. Or you can get what is called useless use of get and grep award, and run this ridiculously long one-liner to ensure that everything is set up correctly. Or you might do it in the right way, and you might use this set of commands piped together and echo pass or echo fail, depending on the result, if you want to script it. The downside of this is that it's quite complex, in my opinion, to understand and support. Like, I'm not sure how many people in this room know about getEnd command. Quite some people. Okay. So yeah. Anyway, this is not how a proper testing should be done. It's not kind of unified way, because some platforms, for example, lack this getEnd command, and I would love to see some kind of abstraction layer on top of the shell commands. This is what Ansible does, by the way. It's just a wrapper around usual shell commands you're using. There is this abstraction layer, and it's called Serverspec. It's written in Ruby by a Japanese guy. His name is Gosuke Miyashita. I hope got his name right. It's basically RSpec tests for servers. And what Serverspec does, it translates the RSpec tests that you write to shell commands, and it uses SSH, WinRM, Docker API, interfaces like that to actually check the actual state of your machines. The official site, which contains all the documentation, is serverspec.org. And as you can see on the slide, on the screen, our test case with the user nobody looks really simple. Like, it's, if you read it out loud, it's almost plain English. So we describe the user nobody, which should exist and which should have login shell as being no login. It's pretty awesome. To get started, you need Ruby, of course. You might want to have Ruby version 2.3, because this is what I used to prepare for this presentation, to run the demo. It might work on older Ruby versions as well, but I'm not sure about it. After Ruby installation, by the way, I would recommend you to use some virtual environments for installing Ruby, right, like RBenv or RVM, because it takes care about all the dependencies, and it basically installs you a very you get a very consistent Ruby installation, and you can maintain different versions of Ruby for your own profit. So after you have Ruby installed, you have to install the Serverspec gem, create a working directory for where you will hold your tests, and run this nifty command serverspec-init, which will ask you some questions and will generate you some boilerplate. The main parts of Serverspec test suite are the rake file and the spec helper. I will speak about those parts later a little bit. What I want to speak now, what I want to describe now is the disadvantages of the default boilerplate. Serverspec was initially designed to test only one single machine. The guy who wrote it, initially he didn't keep in mind that we might have a cluster of machines that are set up in exactly the same way, and that some code sharing should be applied. With the default setup, you basically create one subdirectory in the spec directory, and it's one subdirectory per machine. And if you have like 10 servers that are set up in exactly the same way, you will have 10 subdirectories and 10 test files that contain exactly the same code. This is not quite the good approach because there is this dry or don't repeat yourself principle that cannot be followed in this situation. Good thing is that since it's RSpec, it's Ruby, you can modify your rake file and kind of create some rules and describe your infrastructure using Ruby code. I want to show you how it looks like, so just give me a second. Right, so this is pretty long, and but it doesn't do anything special. So what it does is it goes through all the subdirectories, all the files and directories in the spec directory. It sees if what it processes right now is a directory or not, and if it encounters a directory, it appends it to the roles list. So each subdirectory in a spec directory will represent a role name, like database, web server, capsule, satellite, whatnot. After we have our roles list generated, we iterate through each of the roles directory and find files that have a special naming convention. So the name of the file should conform to fully qualified domain name _ spec.rb. And based on that, we tell Serverspec where it should go, what machine it should log into to run our tests. And then based on the host list, we generate the set of rake tasks, which are basically represent the testing actions themselves. So it's really easy. And if you know any programming language, you will be able to understand this rake file in no time. So this is how I use it. And I was working on implementing, like, this assumes that you have a file system layout that conforms to your infrastructure. But since it's Ruby, you can use YAML file, for example, to create a list of roles, and then the list of roles will contain a list of servers attached to it. Or you can even talk to satellite, for example, and based on the information that you fetch from satellite, you can apply some roles to the servers. So your rake file will be a little bit more complex in this case, and some advanced programming skills are needed. But the possibility is there, which is pretty awesome in my opinion. I'm going to commit the YAML file support to the same Git repository that you saw at the start of the presentation. The second part of the, like we spoke about the rake file and what it allows you to do. The second part of the server spec is spec helper, where you specify the metadata, username to log into the machine, password or SSH key. You modify SSH settings there, stuff like that. It also, the support for shared tests, shared testing is also implemented in the spec helper, and I'm going to show you what exactly it does. It's really simple. So these two lines, they basically do some, again, file processing, and they fetch all the files in the shared directory and just run a require on it, which is basically import in Python or include in C, something like that. This is how you can reuse the shared code on your machines. I will not speak about formatters too much. The only thing that I will say that there are 3 built-in formatters in Serverspec: documentation, HTML, and JSON. Documentation is what you see in the console output that I will show you in a couple of minutes. HTML just generates an HTML file with the results. I will also show it to you how it looks like. And JSON generates a JSON formatted file, which you then can import to some database, or you can feed it to some script that will process the JSON and generate some statistics for you. Let's get to the practical part of this presentation. So, how you can implement how you can employ a server spec during the Ansible role development. The steps are pretty easy. You get the requirements for the role. You translate the requirements to the server spec tests. You run the tests on a clean machine to make sure that they are failing. Then you implement your Ansible tasks, and you run the tests again to see if you got it right in the Ansible. Let me actually show you what I mean. Can you hear me? It's fine? Yeah, so because I was told that the microphone is not good here and people might have troubles hearing me. So we will be creating an Ansible role that does Apache installation on a machine. Very easy. Like, it will install the HTTPD package. It will make sure that HTTPD is running, and it will create a very simple index.html file. So those are our requirements. And those requirements are translated in this really simple set of tests. So we create a packages list, 3 of them. For each package, we ensure that the package is installed. Then we ensure that the HTTPD is running. And then we test that index.html file has certain permissions and owned by user nobody and group nobody. And we match its content to some string. Right, so I have this Vagrant box, Vagrant virtual machine prepared. It already has the packages installed, because it would take some time otherwise, which we don't have. And I'm going to run this test again, this machine. to see the list of all the, can you actually see it? The very last line on the console? Okay, so to see what machines are you going to test when you run rake spec command, you can run rake -T, and you see that we have only one test here, which tests this demo machine. So we are going to run it and see what happens. So as we can see, we have 10 tasks or examples. This is the RSpec. This is how RSpec calls the test tasks. So we have 10 examples and 7 failures. As I said, that we have all the packages installed, 3 of them, and all other tasks were failed. And right here we see what exactly is wrong with our machine. And service is not running, and something is wrong with index.html. And of course, there is nothing listening on the port 80 because HTTPD is not running. So we go ahead and develop a role. I already have it developed. I will just show you what it does. So we have this Ansible role that installs stuff, makes sure that index.html has correct permissions, owner and group, and it makes sure that HTTPD is running. So let's run the Ansible playbook and see if the tests will be green this time. So we have the index.html generated, and HTTPD is running. And now we are running our tests, and bam, it's green. I mentioned that Serverspec generates HTML files with the reports. Here is how it looks like. Excuse me. Unfortunately, I cannot quite make it bigger, but believe me, it just describes the all the tests that you have and their results. Shortly, I will show you how it looks like with the failed test. So this is the initial development of an Ansible role, and you can see that it doesn't quite look good because the syntax highlighting is a little bit off in Vim, and it's because I'm using old YAML notation for it. So I want to refactor it, and I want to look it a little bit more YAML friendly, let's say. And what I also want to do is I want to ensure that service not only started, but it also enabled. So after I reboot the virtual machine, the HTTPD is still running. I have this HTTPD refactored role here, which already looks a little bit more readable, in my opinion. And it has this enabled keyword set as well. What we are missing is that we are missing the test implementation for HTTPD to be enabled. And to audit, we just edit the test file that I showed you before. And just add another test here that HTTPD service should be enabled. Let's run the test and see what results we will get. So as expected, because we didn't have Ansible task to actually enable HTTPD before, the one test fails, the one that we have just added. And we see what exactly fails, that the HTTPD service should be enabled and it's not. And in the report, it looks like this. So you can see this huge red box here, which shows you what test has failed precisely. Now, after we run our modified role, let me just edit the playbook. So it does its job, and after that, hopefully the tests will pass. So yes, we have only one changed item after the Ansible run, which is exactly the enabled state of HTTPD service. So let's just make sure that we did everything correctly. And yes. So every time you want to change something in your existing Ansible role, or you want to migrate part of your automation task from Puppet to Ansible, or vice versa, or you want to migrate from Ansible to Chef or SaltStack or anything, you can write the tests first, describe your environment in the most suitable way for you, then do the migration and run the tests after you migrated your automation code to another automation suite, or you just refactored it. This might save you some time during the support process or troubleshooting process. That's it. Hopefully this talk was useful for you. Do you have any questions? Anyone? Please.
One of the failed assertions was like there should be a file named something like in the path, and it shows there should be a file. So it's usually quite useful to see not just what has failed, but what is true about that thing instead. Can I get that somehow out of Serverspec? Like there should be, you are expecting a file, but it's a directory, or I want to see this information because it's a useful shortcut to diagnosing the difference.
So yeah, the Serverspec do have this capability, and it's just the question was if Serverspec shows you the actual state when a test is failed. So for example, there was a failed test that showed that file doesn't exist. The B file test has failed, and it was not clear from the output what is the actual state, if it doesn't exist or it's a directory or stuff like that. And the question was if Serverspec can show you this. Yes, it can, and for some matchers, it actually shows you what's actually wrong. In this case, the file was not existent, and that's why you saw nothing. The actual state was like no state, basically. But if the index.html will be a directory instead, then you will see that expected var www.html index.html to be a file, but got directory instead. So yeah. Sometimes it doesn't show it, but most of the time when the actual state, when the object that you're trying to test is there, but it has some state that you don't expect, you will see what it is. There was someone to my right with a question.
Hi. Have you looked at other solutions like Webs instead of Serverspec?
Excuse me?
Have you looked
Yeah, so the question is, have I been looking to other solutions instead of Serverspec? The answer is, I didn't know that other solutions do exist. Yes?
Do you have any real-world examples of usage? Because you mentioned, for instance, writing tests for migration from, for Ansible, but to Substack, which is, for me, in some deployment scenarios it might make sense, but actually Substack or Puppet or whatever, it actually ensures a state. So if I write the same Puppet manifest, or in Chef manifest, or in Substack manifest, I will get the information that, the file does not exist, the HTTP service is not running, and actually Substack will start it for me. So, I'm just looking for some real-world example when you are actually, when you can see that this is useful.
So the question was, there are actually a couple of questions I heard in this monologue. The first question was, are there any real-world examples for Serverspec? Yes, there are. For example, I use it currently. In Red Hat, we have a huge satellite deployment with 7 or 8 capsules, and all the capsules should be set up in the same way. So I have a test suite that tests those capsules are the same. And it actually was quite helpful because those capsules were set up by different people, and initially more than half of them were set up completely differently. And those tests... Yes, that's true. Sometimes you just need to set up stuff and then write the Ansible automation for it. And then there was another question, or actually concern, that when you use Puppet or something that runs an agent on a machine, it will ensure the state of this machine anyway. Is that right? Yeah. Yes, yes, and it's completely fine because if I have this task, for example, right now currently, to migrate some subset of Puppet manifests from the Puppet to Ansible, because they are only one-time tasks that belong to provisioning process, not to configuration management process. And I wrote tests that ensure that I don't forget to migrate all the manifests I have to migrate, and I don't lose anything in the middle, And more on this, there might be 3 people involved in the process. One guy wrote Ansible playbooks, the other guy has this task to switch part of Ansible roles to Puppet, and there is a third guy, the actual user of a system. Those tests kind of ensure that during this migration you don't forget to control something, because this is what happens during refactoring. Actually, when I was preparing to this presentation and when I was refactoring this HTTPD role from badly formatted to the good formatted, I lost the part that ensured ownership of a file, and the test started to fail, and I saw it immediately and yeah, this line was deleted while I was copying and pasting text around. So it was useful even for sake of this presentation.
This is basically the scenario for going from Puppet to Ansible.
Well, the main idea is not to lose stuff on your way from one thing to another thing. Yes?
Let's say you forgot to add this test. How do you ensure that you have all tests to test the old Puppet configuration and then to test the new Ansible configuration so you know that both do the same thing? How do you ensure that you've got all the tests?
So the question is, how do I actually ensure that I have all the tests in place? Well, that's where test-driven development process kicks in. You just have to adhere to the process. Yeah, in this case, again, it's the same. You gather requirements, and you ensure that you gathered all the requirements first. Then you write your tests based on those requirements, and then you implement the other thing that you want to migrate to, right? So there is a possibility to forget to write a test for something, but this just means that you don't follow the test-driven development process. That's it.
Basically, there's
something there, but like, why would you use Puppet and Ansible at the same time?
So the question is, why would I use Puppet and Ansible at the same time? Because Ansible is meant to be a provisioning tool, and Puppet meant to be a configuration management tool. And in my sysadmin picture of world, it's completely two different things, and different tooling exists to do these things, right?
Not really, not necessary.
Yeah, I agree, it's arguable, but it's just my personal preference, let's say.
Puppet has the overhead that is kind of running in the background all the time, same as CF engine, for example. But with Ansible, you can run the Ansible, for example, within Jenkins, that will actually run the code and always just when there is a change. So you wouldn't run Ansible all the time, or you wouldn't do a manual change on the host machine or in your VM, but instead you would just kind of through Git he would push a change, and when Jenkins see the change, he would run the playbook, and therefore it would keep the consistency of the system all the time. So instead of running Puppet or CF engine agent on the machine every 5 or 15 minutes, let's say, you have just Ansible to run the playbook whenever the change is actually implemented.
So yeah, the comment from the audience was that why would we use two different tools to control one machine, basically? And the suggestion was to have some Jenkins job that will run Ansible periodically, and it will ensure the state of the machine instead of running Ansible to provision it and then set up Puppet on top of this machine and let it run each half an hour, each 15 minutes. My comment on this would be that both approaches have their right to be implemented. And again, it's just a matter of adopted practices in each separate sysadmin team. We are doing it like this. We have Ansible playbooks that we are running when we are setting something up initially. And then we have Puppet, which runs periodically on the machine and ensures that stuff is set up in a way we expect it to be. Sorry. There was a question from Darren. He was earlier than you. Excuse me.
So, test-driven design is great. I like it. Do you know of anyone who's doing behavior-driven design for infrastructure at this point? So rather than saying, here are the files that should be on the server, the port should be open, saying, from the outside, I should be able to hit this web service, get this result, which ensures the web service is up, the port is open, the firewall is correct, the content is correct.
Not quite get the question. Like,
So there's two different philosophies for test-driven first or behavior-driven first when you're writing test cases.
Okay. So the question is, there are two. Yeah, there are two approaches in writing tests: test-driven, like what I have shown you, and behavior-driven. I cannot answer this because I don't know what is behavior-driven tests. And as I said at the start of the presentation, know close to nothing about software testing. So I might, miss some concepts, some basic concepts.
Next question is, this is the Puppet versus Ansible thing. If you use Ansible to initially provide the machine and then the Puppet takes care of the machine, how do you make sure that the Puppet won't die, and you will be left with a machine that you believe that is set up, and there is periodical job to ensure, but the demo that is actually dead. We don't know what's going on the machine.
Yeah, so the question was, in the situation when we use Ansible to provision a machine and then run a Puppet periodically on it, how do we actually ensure that Puppet is actually doing its job and that it's actually not dead, that it's running, that it's there?
Ansible, you get the immediate feedback. You either have a Jenkins job or you are on your laptop running the playbook, and you get immediate feedback that something went wrong, the machine is unreachable. With Puppet, there is a daemon running on the machine, you don't have access to log. You need to check.
Yeah, so the concern is that with Ansible you get immediate results that something is wrong. You can see changed or failed tasks, and with Puppet it's not quite clear because it's a daemon that is running on a machine and you don't quite see it, right? So my answer to this is there is monitoring for it, which ensures that you have a Puppet process in place and that we kind of work this around by having a manifest in Puppet. We change a special file every time, and we have a monitoring check for which checks this file, and if its M time is larger than half an hour, we see an alert. And this means that Puppet is not doing its job anymore.
You mentioned there's special directory structures and use your rate file to host association.
Mm-hmm.
Since you're doing this with Ansible tests, is there a use case or easy way to distribute the test case with the role and use the Ansible inventory to determine what the inventory file is to run tests against?
So the question basically is if you can, if there is an easy way to match existing Ansible roles and existing Ansible inventory with the roles in Serverspec. The answer is there is no easy way for it. You have to know Ruby and kind of code this up. I didn't see, actually this is a good question. I was trying to look for something that is ready, but I had the impression that either people don't know about Serverspec too much, this is why I speak about it right now in the first place, or people just cannot find a use case for it, which is obviously not true, taking that there are at least some people here in this audience. But yeah, there is no easy way or ready-to-use tools. Okay, anything else? Any other questions, comments, jokes? Well, beers I will have today. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thank you for coming. Bye.